Hello and welcome to New York Empire Podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Dan Hilton. He's Matt Pippin Auletta, or I should say a Wildwood multi-time trophy winner in Matt Pippin Auletta. You had that sun, whether it was too much sun or not enough sun. I hope you've shaken it all off, gotten the sand out of your boots, and you're ready to talk a little bit of Empire action, right?
Oh yeah. Wildwood's always a good time. It was beautiful weather. Ocean was top notch. So good stuff.
Well, the one Wildwood story I have is this is going quite a few years back. My first time I ever saw Matt Esser was at Wildwood on the beach, and he wound up. I think it was something that he skipped something he shouldn't have skipped. I don't know if it was club related or early spinners days, but he shouldn't have been at Wildwood. He should have been doing his other commitments in the ultimate world. But he was like, I cannot possibly miss ultimate. It's not in my contract, Wildwood rather. But he said it's not in my contract, but it's kind of in my contract. They know that I'm going to be here, and I'm here to do my thing. So again, totally understand. Don't forget about Beach Ultimate. But we're going to go back to the grass now here, or the turf, whatever you want to call it, because the Empire ended the regular season, of course, now 2 weeks ago against Montreal. So we're not really going to recap that game, but it was the first team to post back-to-back perfect regular season records, a 27-game winning streak. Hard to say how you surmise or sum up what this regular season was, but I guess the only question I'd ask you is you were a part of that 2019 title, and you were obviously following the team last year with the 2022 title. So with the Empire going undefeated, do you think it's the best incarnation or the best regular season perfect record that the Empire have captured in their history so far?
Oh, absolutely. Just the road trip they completed out west, Colorado, Salt Lake, DC multiple times. Yeah, they're just playing a gauntlet of harder teams. I mean, they're almost just doing a tour of the best teams in the league, and the East is also probably the strongest or second strongest division, I guess. But yeah, no, they're this is amazing.
Yeah, I definitely give the East second strongest. Yeah, maybe behind the West because the West just had so many teams in it more than, well, I guess one more team, but you get the point that there are multiple teams fighting for the playoffs in a way that mathematically didn't work out for the East in that way. But I want to kind of focus here in a very micro sense. We kind of give out little regular season awards yet before the actual award season and have a debate about the MVP and things like that. Because right now with the MVP, again, we sit on this from the Empire perspective. And I think that conversation of the MVP, what I'm defining it as, and loosely, would be the best player on the best team, which obviously gives it to an Empire player, sure. But I think there are also fair statistical arguments as to why an Empire player should win it over someone else in the league, especially on teams that didn't necessarily make the playoffs, I should say. So for the Empire, the two candidates, I mean, jump in if you disagree, but it's Jeff Babbitt and Ryan Oscar, correct? I don't really see any other candidates there. But if Jeff wins it, I look at the first matchup in DC. That was the one down in DC that ended in overtime as the game that kind of won him that award. And I know it was early in the season and all that stuff, but it set the tone for the season. And it felt like it put the Empire in a place where they rode that momentum almost the rest of the season. Because his numbers aren't, they're not too big. They're not so much bigger than everybody else's in some category like goals that is outrageous. But he had 48 goals in the regular season last year and 50 this year. So I know it feels like this season has come even easier, and he scored so much more, and he's memed himself to the front cone in the AUDL lore. But he only has 2 more regular season goals than he had last season when he made the transition to O line. So he actually has scored more, He scored more in the O line last season than he did this season. Because again, it took him 4 games to truly make that move over to the O line last year. His 15 blocks though are almost double his 8 from last season, and his 15 regular season blocks are right around 5 other seasons where he had 16 or 17, playing on the D line. So very similar block numbers to while he's playing on the O line game they dispatch. Again, nothing compares to his 50 goal, 41 block, 9 assist season in 2017. I mean, that's just outrageous. And again, that happened in 14 regular season games, not 12. So to me, if you don't listen to numbers, you can ignore all of what I said. To me, I'm making the claim that this has been the most complete adult play your role to the letter and lead the best team in the league on the O-line from Jeff Babbitt. And that is why he is my league MVP, just because that is, again, my total argument that not only for Jeff, but if there is nothing more that you could possibly have asked from Jeff Babbitt this season on the best team in the league.
No, and I saw him complete a huck once this year too, so he's really just dialed in. No, he's just so dominant. That's a fair pick. What are you going to say? He's been the best cutter, scoring the most goals, and he makes it look easy. And then, like you said, he's got some blocks to get them back when they do make a mistake. So some of those are just buzzer beaters where he's dinging the other team because he's out there on those 10-second long D lines,
Mm-hmm.
and he gets a lot of swats. But yeah, I mean, nobody can really compete with him in the air, even though he's not the tallest or the biggest. Well, he's the biggest in some sense.
Biggest.
But yeah, it's it's definitely his most complete season by far. He looks amazing out there.
You want the counter argument because the counter argument is Ryan Osgar. So
yeah, and it's so hard. I mean, so real quick, just like as a whole team, they do so well because they're all so good. You can't just, as the other team, you can't just focus in on stopping one person because they beat you in so many different ways. And even if you kind of stop one of these players in one way, then they beat you in another way. I mean, Osgar last year in the playoffs, they tried to prevent him from throwing all the goals. So he was just like, okay, I'll just score 17 goals in the playoffs. So, there's just so many different ways you could look at who is the most valuable player here. And it's hard when the whole team is that good. And we're not even mentioning some of the literal best players in the world that they play next to. So I don't know. It's crazy. It's really hard for me to I thought I would have a clear pick. I want to pick Jeffrey because I love him. I want to pick Osgar because the throws and everything he does out there is amazing. He's like a little wizard with the Frisbee, but I just don't know. I don't know. Does somebody on a different team matter more to their actual team than those guys?
Well, we'll get to that in a second because I want to make the Osgar pitch now because if they give it to Ryan Osgar too, it's not to say that my pick is Jeff Babbitt, but if Ryan Osgar is the pick, then that is a totally fair pick beyond Jeff even because in 11 games, Osgar led the league with 65 assists. And you're a handler, and I try to handle. So what is most important to Ultimate? It's throwing the disc. If nobody knows how to throw a disc, then you get nowhere, right? Like
then you're playing soccer, yeah.
Right, high level throwing is the point of Ultimate, and no one throws at a higher level than Ryan Osgar. And I don't want to take away from this year because of last year being like, oh well, he got one, so now it's Jeff's turn. Like it's kind of what it feels like a little bit, but yeah, he led the league with 65 assists. He had 16 goals and 2 blocks and a plus 71, which is all fine and high in those categories around the league for players of his ilk. Then last season, counting the postseason, he had 72 assists, 43 goals, and 2 blocks with a plus 103. So doing a bit more assisting, a little less scoring than he did last year. But I think teams kind of started this year saying, we're going to force him out for everything. And then that didn't work because it left too many people way too wide open. And I think to that point, teams have kind of adjusted to be like, okay, let's try to minimize everybody a little bit. And that's probably our best game plan instead of trying to key in on just stopping Jack or stopping Oscar or stopping Babbitt. Last season, he had 7.6 scores per game. This season, 7.4 scores per game. So very similar to last year's MVP season. And I think the argument for Osgar is what gave Jack the playoff MVP last season. The brighter the lights this season, the better the Osgar. Talking to him with the Ringer after the Colorado game, where he had 6 assists and a goal, but 3 turns. So we were like, oh my gosh, Ryan Oscar had 3 turnovers. He's human. But he said he figured out the altitude and he was confident for Salt Lake the next day, 24 hours later. Then, in the biggest game of the regular season, one of the biggest regular season games ever, he had 9 assists and a block, over 300 yards, both throwing and receiving, with no turns. Against Atlanta, he also had 9 assists with just 1 turn. And at DC, the same game that could get Jeff the MVP was my argument, Ryan Oscar had 6 assists, 2 goals, a block, and 0 turnovers. So if my argument for Jeff Babbitt, he should win it because what more could you ask of him? I asked that same question. What more could you possibly ask of Ryan Osgar? Every time the team seems to say, okay, this is a pretty good opponent. Who's going to step up? Who do we have? The answer has been Osgar. This season.
Yeah, and sorry, and the only times the team has looked mortal this season is actually when Osgar struggled, not necessarily when Jeff wasn't exploding for, a 5+ goal performance. When Osgar struggled a little in Colorado to start, the game was close. Once he figured it out and dialed it in, they pulled away towards the end. I mean, part of that's the amazing defense, but once he stopped making those mistakes and giving them a chance, the game was over. And when he is dialed in, nobody can stop them. So maybe, sorry, Jeff. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of talking myself into. I mean, the league would never give it co-MVPs on the same team, But I think there's a realistic argument for that to be the case. That I'm like walking back the only Jeff solo award and saying it probably should be co-MVPs because it's hard to decide between two players on the same team, which again, just it doesn't happen. You don't do it that way, but I don't understand why, right? You can just ask why. But to your point, around the rest of the league, Max Shepard, Pittsburgh didn't make the playoffs, but he did lead the league in scores. And I think, again, the lack of success for his team is going to hurt him. He has a first highlight of the season, beating, was it Madison in week 1 with that buzzer beater and things like that. And then the same argument goes for Seattle's Garrett Martin, who put up some huge numbers this year, but it's just Seattle just wasn't good enough as a team. And then for Sean McDougal and Pavlianis, who with LA becoming the darlings of, we'll say, the early round of the postseason at least, until maybe they meet Salt Lake. We'll see what happens there. But again, I'm not betting against McDougal and Giannis and those kind of players. And of course, Landesman coaching that team. So I'm going to say that, if they get all the way to championship weekend, there is going to be an argument or a campaign. It's all going to be laid out for McDougal or Pavlianis having similar arguments as Oscar and Jeff, because the numbers are there. But again, both of those players, that being Giannis and McDougal, are both top 6 in total scores. And again, like the Empire, that actually might hurt them if in terms of their campaign. It's hard to say you're the league MVP if you don't know who the actual MVP of your own team is. And you then don't have the problem that you had an undefeated season to help that, right? So it's like, how do you give it to one of those two when the Empire are the same argument as far as who is the league MVP? I mean, who is the MVP of that team? And you went undefeated. So that actually kind of creeping in the grass here. I'm seeing Jordan Kerr as Salt Lake's representative. He was 4th in total scores, 2nd behind only McDougal in plus minus. And like Oscar, it felt easy for him this season, but his team was even better for it. And if Salt Lake had beaten New York, the award is 100% going to Jordan Kerr. But they didn't, so it might not be. And it's like, that's how small the margin is.
Yeah, this feels like the closest race in the last few years. Maybe a few years back when Rowan McDonald won it over Yacht, I thought Yacht probably should have won that award based on just overall impact. But, top level Rowan, I understand why he got it, and he was a headache for us for sure. But yeah, Jordan Kerr, it's just hard to say what they would be without him because he's done everything for them, and he's a little more diversified goals and assists and blocks than everybody else. But yeah, they didn't get it done in that last little bit. And will that hurt him for the award? Maybe. It'd be nice if Empire players just kept collecting MVP awards every year. It's fun for us. It's fun to watch. But at the same time, maybe somebody else truly is the most valuable to their team when, like you said, if you don't know who the MVP of your own team is, what do you do? It's hard. I don't know. It'd be fun to vote on this, but I'm kind of glad I don't get to vote on it. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you ask Jeff Babbitt, he says Ryan Oscar. If you ask Ryan Oscar, he says Jeff Babbitt. So you get no answers from the players either. So let's switch to a different category here. Does an Empire player have a shout as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate? And I do say this a bit tongue-in-cheek because Lucas Ambrose, as I said, the hype wave has already begun and has already left. I mean, it's already left the track. He's already basically wrapped up the Rookie of the Year award by beating Colorado in the postseason. And he ripped the title away from Walker Frankenberg, who, again, I felt like a few weeks ago was going to be the candidate. But because Oakland winds up losing 2 games in a weekend, then Frankenberg has to say goodbye to that because now they're not in the postseason. Instead, it's LA who beats Colorado. But Ambrose also did lead the league with 24 blocks. He had 4 more than Justin Burnett of Atlanta, who has 20. Another rookie in William Wettenberg of Indy, who has 20 as well. Holzmeyer had 18, and Yacht was tied with Jordan Kreckbarner of San Diego with 17. So in the top 13 in blocks, so 15 or more, only one team has 3 players in the top 13 in blocks. Obviously, it is New York with Yacht, Babbitt, and Ryan Dross. Atlanta has 2 of the top 4, though, in Burnett and Holzmeyer. But again, it has been Ambrose, who has just been a one-man show out there. Sure, I think the award certainly is going to go to Ambrose. But there are arguments, I think, for 4 Empire players because at some point, how do you reward maybe an historic defense, a D-line that, and that's the tough thing with the Empire, too. They go 2 D-lines deep, which, again, almost hurts the cases because you could make an argument that Ryan Drost, who oscillated between first D-line and second D-line this year, he was tied for second on the team in blocks with Babbitt with 15. And where else around the league, this is a rhetorical question, obviously, But when or where else around the league would a player on your second D line be a potential defensive year, at least candidate? Not winner, but candidate. Because again, I think joining him is Randolph Yacht and Antoine Davis, and we'll throw their stats out there. But I mean, it's just incredible that Ryan Dross, again, has primarily played on the second D line this year and is arguably at least in the top 7 of defensive player of the year candidates.
Yeah, I mean, those are the Drosts, and that's defense. It is. I know you didn't mention Mike, but that's what they do. They just go out there and they get blocks and they put pressure on everybody every single possession. So, yeah, I don't know. Yacht's impact on a turn is massive. He's just so big. I don't know. It's just the team. The team defense is smothering and overwhelming. We mention it, even if it's only for a few minutes every week. I feel like that's why they're undefeated. It's the team. It's all the defenders. The 15th spot on the roster is a defender that would probably start on other teams, offense or defense. It's insane. So, yeah, I don't know who I would pick for this either. It's really tough. It's hard not to say that Yacht's impact is massive just from the overall height, the fire he brings, the just how it kind of the trickle down effect of everybody gets a different matchup.
Well, I mean, I think the telling stat for me about how good the Empire D has been, how good Yacht continues to be, he was third on the team in plus minus, a plus 37. He did lead the team in blocks with 17. He had 20 goals and 11 assists too, so he had more than double digits in all those categories. Of course, he becomes the first player in league history to hit the 300 mark. Like, that is a huge number, of course. But then next to him, Randolph too put in. I mean, if you have defenders or guys who primarily play D-line putting up these numbers, I mean, it tells you how good your team is. He had 9 goals, 17 assists, and 14 blocks, was fourth on the team with a plus 34. So both your third and fourth plus minus getters were both on your D-lines. I mean, that's just bonkers. Again, I don't know the last time that would have happened. I mean, KPS for Madison, I'm trying to think if there was another player for Madison that would have done that with him. That would have made that makes sense to me. And then Antoine Davis closed the season on an absolute heater too. 7 blocks in the last 3 games. Also hasn't turned the disc over once in 2023. The perfect 26 of 26, which isn't a huge sample size, but you get the point. So yeah, moving on to that into a new category, I guess.
Wait, sorry. I do just want to give one quick shout out to somebody we didn't mention who, probably won't win any award for this, but Justin Burnett was great for Atlanta this year. He did have 20 blocks, 9 assists, 9 goals, showing very well-rounded game. And, he was great in the game against New York. So I'm excited to see what the future brings for him.
Yeah, he was in his second season, so he's not getting shouts for the Rookie of the Year award because, again, this is year number 2 for him. But yeah, Atlanta have a good one on their hands, certainly. And I mean, I'm even looking at the numbers. He, again, ends it with 20, but if Jack doesn't catch that weird one at home at Joseph Efesina Field, then he winds up with 21. And those are those small margins, too, about blocks. And I don't want to throw too much shade on Toronto, but the throwing and receiving yards in Toronto because of that field, Kamire and James Lewis are way up there in receiving and throwing yards, and you look at their total scores in a game, you're like, well, how is that mathematically possible? Those numbers are so high when the scores in games weren't necessarily the same. But yeah, it all depends on who you played, when you played them, and things like that. But Burnett, to your point, could do it against anybody, regardless of the opponent. He's going to get blocks, and Ambrose, I think, proved the same thing. So I know the Empire are undefeated and all, but they're honestly playing their best ultimate at this point in season 2. I know they have a few weeks off, but courtesy the AUDL Power Rankings by Adam Ruffner, they closed the regular season with 6 straight games with 13 or fewer turnovers, 72 of 78 in the red zone in their last 5 wins. And once again, we talked about individual stuff for the Empire, but team-wise, it's almost better to focus more on the things that they're doing as a team. And that said, too, we wind up talking about all these individual players, and we always miss somebody every week. So the category that is not really a real trophy or nothing to hand out, breakout player of the season for the Empire. I have 3 candidates here, and we obviously went over it, so I can't have you guess. But Oliver Chartak,
I guessed 2 successfully, so we're on the same page too.
Right.
So I'll just let you run through them, and we'll
Yeah. So Oliver Chartak, that was the easy one. That one was on the tip of your tongue, easy to spit out. Jeff Holm, with a little bit of thought. Jeff Holm is certainly new to the not the AUDL. We played a little bit with Chicago in 2019, but kind of new to a bigger audience, if you will. The Empire does give you that platform. And then Brett and Tan, who did have a bigger audience with Toronto when they were still on top of the East a few years ago, but since that time has been away from the league and is now returns. This is basically version 2.0 of Breton Tan, who's still somehow in his 20s. But yeah, it's Oliver, Breton Tan, and Jeff Holm, three players who, at the start of the year, you're like, what are you going to get out of them? Who are they? How much are they going to give you? And going back to the argument about Babbitt and Osgar, you say with those three, other than Breton playing more games than he did, how much more could they possibly give you? Like, unless Breton doesn't get an injury and plays more games, then what more could they give you? Because Oliver, who stands over 6 feet, as compared to his exactly 6 foot, putting it on the record. So if Elliot's listening, his older brother Elliot is exactly 6 feet tall, and Oliver, however, is taller. That's also on the record. So he did play O line down the stretch. There was a point where Oliver had played 50 O points and 50 D points. Then he ended the season by playing 73 straight O points. He had 14 goals, 11 assists, and 6 blocks on the year. Breton Tan, 7 goals, 4 blocks, and just a difference maker. The Callahan against Colorado, that is the season highlight. And apparently, he told me it was his first Callahan at any level of competitive ultimate to his knowledge, which I find hard to believe for a guy that is Mr. Fantastic out there. And certainly, I don't know how that's happened, but so he's so smooth too. It's a joy to watch. And then Jeff Holm, I already knew he was pretty good from being a club teammate of a bunch of them in the New York area, but he's much more comfortable with the disc than what I saw from him at club level last year, watching up close and personal. So with his size and athleticism, that being Jeff Holm, he's bigger than you think too. There's an argument that the bigger AUDL field, it sort of suits him in a lot of different ways, both throwing and obviously physically, than even the club game does. And it's cool to watch guys like that, like Jeff Holm, who I don't know if he's in that top tier of athleticism in the AUDL, but if it's not A, he's definitely a B tier athlete in the league. Again, if not A. And I just think the bigger field, it does suit those guys who are, I mean, he just makes up ground quickly and he flies and he's just a good athlete.
I agree. Watching him, he didn't always play a ton of points in all these games, but when he was out there, just it looked like he was playing really good defense, covering people well, got some blocks. But the most impressive thing was just the poise on a turn. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to get out of, I guess D2 liners, and especially around the league, sometimes they're not necessarily turnover prone, but they just don't always look super comfortable with the disc. Like, if you told me Jeff Holm was going to play offense the next time the Empire took the field, I'd just be like, okay, that'd be fine. Like, another tall, fast body. It looked like, smooth, fluid throwing motions, didn't really make mistakes. Just like, if you just told me that, I'd be like, okay, sure. Like, I trust the team on that. Like, he looked fine out there. Like, he didn't look panicked. So, yeah, I mean, he played great.
Yeah, I don't want to disparage Josue Alora, who is sub 6 feet, but I think with these three in particular, Chartok, Tan, and Holm, there is a blueprint in the AUDL for top level teams. Is that if you're going to add somebody new, and I know Oliver's second year, but he had a much more refined role this year. But if you're gonna give players big roles or larger roles through the course of kind of just fitting them in there, having them be over 6 feet tall, having them be insanely good athletes like Breton and Jeff makes it pretty simple. That it is a lot of plug and play. Like, okay, great, we can throw that player in there. And I think there's a difference too between, of course, every 18, 19, 20-year-old kid that comes to tryout, because we've gone to the tryouts, right? And you see this kid, you're like, wow, that kid's 6'3", like flying around, oh, he's 18, 19 years old, but he's not ready for what's being asked of Breton and Jeff because those players have been there. Like, Jeff has been to the finals of Club Nationals, and Breton has been to the AUDL Championship weekend with Toronto. Like, the Empire, if you're going to add these players that are over 6 feet and just these natural athletes who you're going to plug and play, well, I mean, these guys are already refined, though. They already have the experience. And to add experience, great athletes like that, I mean, again, that is what takes good teams and makes your recruitment elite. And it's certainly the Empire, obviously, having the pedigree to recruit players of that tier is a different level. It was the same thing with John Lithio, too. I mean, John Lithio, maybe he hadn't had the biggest reputation 3 years when, he came during 2020, but when he joined the Empire, but at the time, he was 27 or 26, 27 years old when he joined the Empire. He had been around the block before, and even though he hadn't played in the AUDL, he was 6'5", and had played high-level Ultimate for quite a few years. Had taken his lumps, knew what to do, and you just add players like that, and it does a lot for you.
Yeah, I didn't really know much about Lithio before he joined the team, and then I think I've said this before, when I was meeting him for the first time at the field and kind of talking to some of the other guys, they were joking about how great he was. Well, semi-serious. And then the game started, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is a very gigantic and amazing human. And yeah, he's been a star since. I do have one breakout player, which calling him a breakout player, maybe I should have touched on it in the defensive thing, but I think it's the best season we've seen from this player so far. And
Let me
it's
guess.
actually,
Let me guess.
all right, sure.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, I think the argument can be made for Josue. I think this is Josue's best defensive year since they joined, but they didn't. They joined 6 games in, so it's like, is that enough for a sample size to say that? But it's not Josue.
No,
Hmm.
no, the metrics might not lean this way, but it's all the stuff that doesn't necessarily get tallied up on the sheet, plus the consistency and the overall athleticism. That's really, they deserve a shout out.
I mean, is it? And it's not Antoine Davis.
No,
And,
it is Antoine
oh, it is
Davis.
Antoine. Yeah. This is Antoine
Yeah.
defensive
So
year by far. Yeah.
yeah, I pulled up his stats again just to take a quick look, and 11 blocks, sure, only 6 goals, only 1 assist, way down, but the number that pops right off is 100% completion percentage, and sure, it's not a lot of throws. The throwing has decreased like every year since 2018. I think the numbers go down a little bit. I mean, obviously he was playing offensive points out there at different points, but I just think that he smothered people, and he had a gigantic impact. And I guess it's hard to say breakout. It's just, I think he upped his game, even if the numbers don't show it. And Ryan Osgar even said it actually in one of the post game interviews when they were out west. Who's been the MVP the last few weeks or something, and he said Antoine Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because taking those incredibly hard matchups, really limiting the other team's top players, and then just even if you're only completing 20, 30 throws a season, if you're not actually turning over a single one, and you're out there playing great defense and having like some impact on a turn, I mean, what more could you ask for? That's like one of the best defensive players in the league, even if the numbers aren't, staggering.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are this far into the podcast, this far into the season, it's likely that you're coming to Empire games or been to Empire games. But if there are younger players that you might know who you're trying to convince to come to the Empire and who might want to learn something from these older players, Antoine Davis is at the top of my come to see him live rankings. Because yes, Yacht and Babbitt, and like, you don't understand how big those guys are and how special they are. That's true. But Antoine Davis live, it's just different. Like, watching him on a screen run around, chase somebody, you just don't understand what kind of effort and intensity and the lack of space that the opposition has when he's chasing them around. Where for the Empire, again, I tell young players that I work with too, on the club side, and I say, I know it feels like you're not Antoine Davis. Like, I can't defend like Antoine Davis. Like that, I'm not learning too much from his athleticism and things like that. But there are principles like orbiting and like simple things that you can try to add to your game, and the intensity of how he sets himself up for making the Ds that he does. Because even if you can't make the D, because you can't, I mean, I can't jump out of the building like that. He is a masterclass in pressure defense. Like, when we talk about the pressure and the comp, that's why I mentioned Josue, because Josue, I don't think a single player caught a disc without them being a foot or two away when they caught every disc this season. And that's a credit to, again, like, how often are these players able to find open unders, and how much over the course of 48 minutes, because that's what we keep saying. You can take a lead on the Empire, but good luck doing it over 48 minutes because of the pressure that individual matchups provide over and over again. And why I say that Antoine, again, and just as an athlete, you just don't understand just how powerful his strides are until you see him in person, until you actually watch him smother somebody live. It's a different category. So speaking of live, the next game is 10 days away on August the 12th, the Saturday, against DC. So we're gonna switch our focus to the last part of this show. Just run through the 8 teams left, basically, real quick. So we're also gonna switch our focus down to DC by talking not much about their Boston 1912. I think the scoreline, having watched that game, the scoreline is nicer than that game was for DC, I should say, against Boston 1912. It never felt close after the first 3 points of the game, which is kind of sad because it was a playoff game. But I will say this in full voice: Tyler Chan is a superhero and a great addition for Boston, and one of the main reasons why they turned their season around. And Rocco Linehan, that pickup, he is a pleasure to watch on the D line. But without Brendan McCann, that glory D line is just missing something that is irreplaceable to them. And until they find the depth to be able to deal with just a cataclysmic injury to McCann, so I hope he gets better as soon as possible. He was just so important for them. But DC then, without Brendan McCann, they took advantage offensively. They're clinical. Just 10 turnovers in the game. Boxley was great as usual, even with the uncharacteristic turnover he had. Joe Merrill was more than important on the break. Rowan is still playing O, and that D is still humming along with everybody healthy. And then Thomas Edmonds is running the show over there. Merriman was playing with some U24 confidence, looked as good as he did all season against Boston. And then DC, look, maybe for the first time all season, I think they looked complete. I said it at Atlanta, and now I'll say it for DC. If they bring the same 20 that played against Boston, that being DC, the Empire's 20 against the Breezes 20 may be the most talented 40 players ever rostered for a single game. That's what we're talking about. I'm just saying, like, having followed this sport now for the last, a decade, but really following it for the last 3 to 4 or 5 years at that level. These are just names. These are names that you go, those players are good. I know they are good. And those are 40 players I know are very good.
Yeah, and earlier in the season, we didn't really get the best versions of New York versus DC. Players were missing, so if everybody's available, yeah, I can't think of a better 20 plus 20 that have ever taken the field. So, I'm curious to see how it all shakes out. If there are any adjustments, if people shift lines, or how the tight line calling gets when it's a must-win game. But I give a slight edge to Empire, but it's hard to say because they handled DC easily when they were without some of their like bigger, taller receivers, and the whole game kind of just whatever. But I don't know. It's exciting.
Yeah, we know that there are break glass case for emergency situations. We know what they are. It's Yacht moving over to O line for points. It's Randolph moving over to O line for points. It's Jack moving over to D line for points, and it's all situational. So it's not like there's, what do you prepare for? It's like you prepare for some of the best players in the world to just play offense or defense and do the opposite of what they normally do, which is things that they do regularly for other teams. So it's like, it's not like there's, again, a blueprint to be like, oh, they're in a position they're not used to. So, all right, let's head out west, because next week I'm going to really work on preview the DC matchup. But some of the other stuff that happened around the league, Los Angeles backed into the playoffs thanks to Oakland's collapse, and then they just beat the Jonathan Nethercutt-less Summit. And I don't take anything away from LA with that win. If there is one guy not on the Empire who I know is going to be listening to this and hearing this, it is Pavel Ganis. So, hi, Pavel. That guy does his homework, and they made the plays. They made the plays down their stretch, and you can only play who's in front of you, too. So, like, whether or not Colorado had Jonathan Nethercutt, like, that wasn't up to LA. They could only go to Colorado and beat the team that was in front of him. But, and it's a big but, not having Nethercutt, like, I in my little notepad, I was like, there was 3 different scores that I counted, and I'm like, if he is there, I see them scoring that goal. And there was those 3 moments when I was like, if they score those 3, then they win by 2. Like, I just doing the math, like tacking those. I know it's not the same thing, but tacking those on the end, they win by 2. Without him, they lose by 1. But due to time, it really felt more like 2. LA won that game in the 4th. It was done. And then, it's weird too, because at LA, if they take down Salt Lake, they are going to be giving major 2020 Flyers vibes. And that will be impossible to ignore. And then everything against the shred will count as fully legitimate. So I'm not trying to take anything away from LA, right? Like, and even if they get pounded by Salt Lake, like the season that they had, adding all these pieces, not knowing who they were, to fully figuring out who they were, having probably the Rookie of the Year and the Defensive Player of the Year, having 2 MVP candidates in McDougal and Pavlianis joining the team in their first season. Just a really good season by the Aviators. Again, I'm not taking anything away from them, but for the Summit, I watched them live. Like, they should have won that game, or it should be them. That makes sense. Like,
yeah, but each team is going to say no, we should have won, or we did win. So I want to give LA the credit they deserve. They were scrappy. They're figuring it out. They're good. You don't want to take anything away from them. And if they do beat Salt Lake, that would be amazing. They really would give off some Raleigh vibes there, just like putting it all together towards the end of the season after like a lukewarm start. Yeah, Colorado was very good. They had a lot of really good athletes this year, but it just didn't seem to all come together. I mean, they couldn't beat Salt Lake in either of those games. They earned their 2 seed, and then it wasn't enough. I mean, and I think it's great just for the league in general that it's not just all these playoff games are going to chalk. It's nice that there is the upset.
Mhm.
The scrappier LA team gets it done, and it just it adds some intrigue and drama. And I'm more excited that it's an LA shred game than I think I would have been for another rehash of the Colorado Salt Lake. Even though Colorado is a very good team, I mean, I guess that would be a good game. It adds a little more to it, a little more spice.
Yeah, I want to like highlight. I know Pavel is like the arguably. I mean, not arguably. I think he's the best thrower in AUDL history. Just for what he's done in the time he's been in the league, I think there are other candidates through the league's history. Like I think Aslan Joy, maybe my all-time favorite thrower of a disc, but Pavel Giannis has mathematically already made himself the best thrower in AUDL history. But Sean McDougal is like a player that I kind of watched, like even with San Diego, like I've kind of watched him through the years, but he's everything is so simple to him, and he's just a great athlete. He's constantly open defensively. He works hard, and I want to give flowers to Sean McDougal because you're right. Like the minute I really sit down and think about it, I go, wait a second. I know that Quinn Finer and Alice Atkins, and there are really good players on Colorado. Like again, like they should be winning the West. But then you're right. I think about it again, and I say, but Sean McDougal was probably the best player this season on the field in that game, right? Pavianis was probably the best, well, not probably, without another cut there. He obviously has the best CV as a thrower in that game, right? Lucas Ambrose is the best mono defender in that game, right? And he had that greatest and he made the plays. So, yeah, there's certainly, I know that they're deeper than I'm saying, but just the top three. I mean, maybe LA had the best three in form. I know it's a soccer term, but in form players in that contest, and it's totally fair. And I think with Salt Lake, yeah, huge question with Jordan Kerr because Jordan Kerr could be and should be number one, the best player in that game. But if he's not, if it's Pavel and Sean McDougal and Lucas Ambrose, if even if LA has 2 through 4, then maybe LA wins that game. And I think there's certainly a path forward to, I mean, not to again overrate your stars, but the Empire can say all they want about depth, but at the end of the day, when the lights are brightest, as we talk about, you rely on your stars, and your stars get it done, and they win you games. Like now going to Austin, Carolina, the same way. Carolina without Gucho Hannes, they just haven't been themselves. Like I know he doesn't feel like a star, but he is their star. Like Joe White is a star, potential talent, all those things, and Saul Yannick is a star, all those things. Alex Davis is a star, but like Gucho Hannes is maybe their superstar, and
So,
without him,
sometimes you need the motor more than the star, and it's they may seem like a star, but truly they're the motor. It's like
yeah.
the Jack Williams of the Empire, also a star, but he's like the motor that keeps the team going when they really need it.
I mean, and then Kyle Hinkie on the other side for Austin, like he is their star, and he played like a star, and they won by one. And they not say they even ride him, but the Flyers they have so much talent. They're young, and yet somehow they're really experienced. You look at like total games for these players that are like 21 years old, like oh they've been here for a few years in the system, and that's a credit to Mike Denardis for even if he didn't make it to the South Division final again or championship weekend again. Like you see that they're kind of building and prepared already for next season. Like it was kind of a reboot. It was a weird like they're not rebuilding or retooling like Toronto or Montreal or something like that. They're saying okay, like the season didn't go the way we wanted. We still made the playoffs as a 3 seed, and now we're going to be ready for next season. We know and learned some things and got more out of players. So, I mean, it's cool for them to have basically retooled for a year while still being a good team because that's what they were. They had a winning record. They were still a good team, that being Carolina, who gave DC more than they could ask for in that loss to Carolina. And then they lost to Austin by one. So that narrative could have completely changed if there's one more block or one more goal or a buzzer beater or whatever. And then lastly, it was Indiana. They smacked the Union. That was the one game, if I'm being honest, I didn't really have much time for because of the Boston DC overlap. And it was the one I largely missed. But once Indy was up by a few, I like tuned in for like 2 or 3 points, and I was like, okay, like Indy's a better team. Chicago is very much incomplete. They are who we thought they were without losing all the pieces that they did. And yeah, so I circled that one as the Indy Minnesota game. That'll be the one I'll have to do my homework on because one of those teams, obviously, Minnesota could host championship weekend. But yeah, of the last 8, I think there are certainly big questions, but I go back to it. The biggest question is DC, New York. I mean, can DC finally take down the Giant? Is the biggest question, I think, still the postseason. Like the West thing is exciting, Salt Lake, LA. And I'm not disparaging Indy, Minnesota, but we know what Indiana, Minnesota is. And then
Yeah.
Austin against Atlanta. Somebody new. You got a new face. You got somebody, and
Yeah.
that's gonna be cool.
I'm picking Atlanta to win that game, but we'll see. You never know. Who knows?
Who you got for Salt Lake, LA?
I think Salt Lake will win. Sorry, LA. I know I just said you guys are great, but I do think the Shred will win. They have a lot of. I was impressed when the Shred played the Empire that they just blew up some of the very good players on some undercuts
Mm-hmm.
and got Ds. And it wasn't like the Empire cutters were just like lax out there. Like it looked like they were working pretty hard. Maybe that like last step to secure the catch, that you take that 1/2 a second to slow down and just like really secure it and not go crazy. But they were just flying through and getting those blocks in that game. And if you can do that against players of that caliber, I'm sure they can do the same against LA. That could just be the difference in the game, the overall intensity. They play different styles, so it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. But I don't know. Maybe in the end, LA will be more poised in a bigger stage. But the Shred have looked good. I think they're gonna win.
Yeah, I actually hedge Salt Lake because of their O line. I just think LA are just like 2 or 3 defenders short that the Empire had in that matchup. Like the Empire had those 2 or 3 extra defenders they needed to wind up giving the Salt Lake O line. Because I mean, watching that game for Salt Lake's O line, it either comes very, very easily where everything is within 2-3 seconds of releasing the disc and just moving it, even open side, just move it up the open side. And if you can make Salt Lake stop and take a breath and think about it, that's the only way. I mean, Salt Lake, that's the only way that you can really stop their offense or prevent them from doing something. You have to make them think about it because again, they're young and they know what to do. And if they can go into robot mode where they go, okay, open, 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 it's gonna be a rough go for LA. And then Indy, Minnesota. I mean, it should be Minnesota's year, right? Like Atlanta and Minnesota, like it should be your time. I agree with you. Like for those 2 teams, it should be your time. And then Indy, Minnesota, you remember Indy in 2019. You met them in the playoffs. Then for Austin, yeah, I mean, it would be. There's a lot of haters out there saying they only play and beat up on Dallas and Houston this year. So Austin certainly could stop the doubters. So this is the longest one we've done of the season. It was a kind of a playoff preview and all that stuff. So we will not be back next week. The next time you are going to hear from Pippin. Well, I might talk to you next week about the DC stuff, but next time you'll hear from Matt is after that East Division final, New York DC. So we'll see again how that all shakes out. But for him, again, Wildwood multi-time champion, and myself, we'll see you on the 12th, 7 p.m. Joseph Facina Field. Be there.